as USS Saratoga approached San Diego Harbor on December 7, 1941, to embark her air group. Events thousands of miles away forever changed the course of history. That same morning, the Japanese launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, crippling much of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. By dawn, on December 8th, Saratoga had been designated the flagship of Carrier Division 1 and was immediately ordered to sail for Hawaii. The Japanese, however, were not solely focused on Hawaii. Their strategy involved a coordinated wave of assaults across the Pacific, catching American outposts and forces by surprise. Among these targets was a small, remote atoll known as Wake Island. Despite its size, this speck of land became the focus of extraordinary resistance. A handful of Marines, sailors, and civilian contractors stationed there managed to repel an initial strike, a feat that astonished both allies and enemies. Yet their victory was only temporary. Saratoga and her fleet steamed westward to reinforce Wake, but the journey was long and fraught with complications. The fleet needed to cross nearly half the Pacific Ocean to reach the island. Storms, the necessity of refueling, and constant enemy movements slowed the advance, leaving the garrison stranded, isolated, and forced to prepare for another assault entirely on their own. Wake Island itself was a tiny, lonely outpost, situated about 2,000 miles west of Hawaii and nearly halfway to Japan. It was little more than a ring of coral in the middle of a vast ocean, comprised of Wake, Wilkes, and Peel islets. The atoll had been noted by 19th-century naval planners as a potentially strategic site for an advanced defensive position. Yet it was not until early 1941 that construction truly began, undertaken by civilian contractors tasked with creating runways, defensive positions, and living quarters for a future U.S. garrison. Its strategic value was undeniable. Located uncomfortably close to the Japanese-occupied Marshall Islands, the atoll provided a forward operating base that threatened Japanese lines of communication. Conversely, if seized by Japan, it would give them a vital outpost to project power deeper into the Pacific and closer to the United States. By December 1941, construction was still incomplete. Only 449 U.S. Marines were stationed there, along with several dozen Navy personnel, a handful of Army radio operators, and over 1,100 civilian workers. The defenses were meager compared to what was needed to resist a determined invasion. Military planners later estimated the garrison was short by more than 2,000 men for the position to be considered reasonably defensible. Still, the Marines did their best with what they had: 6 5-inch coastal guns, 12 3-inch anti-aircraft guns, 12 F-4F Wildcat fighters, and a limited stockpile of small arms and machine guns. The defenders also had assistance from 45 Guamanian employees of Pan American Airways, who were stationed on the island as part of the Trans-Pacific Clipper service. On December 7th, word of the attack on Pearl Harbor reached Wake, and everyone on the atoll knew they would be attacked soon. The strike came the next day at noon. Japanese bombers swept in from bases in the Marshall Islands, catching most of the Wildcats on the ground, lacking radar, and with heavy cloud cover obscuring their approach. The defenders were taken by surprise. In minutes, most of the fighters were destroyed, leaving only for surviving aircraft airborne. The initial raid also inflicted devastating casualties on ground personnel. Despite this, the civilians stepped into the breach. Workers who had been building runways and housing took up tools to fortify defenses, carried supplies, and even assisted in manning positions. American submarines Tambor and Triton patrolled nearby waters in an attempt to provide early warning, but they could not stop the onslaught. On December 11th, the Japanese invasion fleet arrived, consisting of light cruisers, destroyers, patrol craft, and transports carrying special naval landing troops. Rear Admiral Satamichi Kajioka assumed the garrison would already be broken by days of bombardment, but he underestimated their resolve. As his ships closed in, the Marines held their fire until the enemy moved within range. At about 4,000 yards, Wake's coastal guns roared to life. Their fire struck the destroyer Hayate, which exploded in a massive blast after her magazine was hit, sinking with all hands. Other Japanese ships were also damaged, and the Wildcats contributed by strafing and bombing enemy vessels. One bomb hit Kisaragi, detonating depth charges and sinking the destroyer in a fiery explosion. It was a humiliating defeat for the Japanese Navy, the first tactical setback they had suffered in the war, and the only attempted amphibious landing repelled by shore-based guns in the entire conflict. News of the victory electrified the American public, still stunned from the devastation at Pearl Harbor just days earlier. For a brief moment, the small garrison on Wake Island became a symbol of defiance, showing that Japan could be resisted. But the Marines and civilians knew the reprieve was temporary. Their supplies were limited, reinforcements were far away, and the enemy was regrouping. Kajioka called for reinforcements, and the Japanese sent elements of the same fleet that had attacked Pearl Harbor, including powerful carriers and heavy cruisers. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy attempted to mount a relief operation, centered on USS Saratoga. A task force was dispatched, but the distances involved were immense, and Japanese naval superiority in the region posed a constant threat. For 2 weeks, the defenders endured relentless daily bombardments. Japanese carrier aircraft struck with overwhelming force, while shore installations crumbled under naval shelling. The last 4 Wildcats fought valiantly, shooting down 21 enemy aircraft before being destroyed or disabled. Without air cover, the garrison's chances dwindled. When intelligence revealed the scale of Japanese reinforcements, the American relief fleet was recalled to Pearl Harbor, leaving Wake to its fate. On December 23rd, in the early hours of the morning, Japanese forces returned in strength. More than 2,000 troops landed under cover of heavy bombardment. The defenders fought ferociously, engaging in close combat among the sand dunes and gun emplacements. Marines, sailors, and even civilians joined in desperate hand-to-hand fighting. But the disparity in numbers was overwhelming. By dawn, with their lines shattered and ammunition exhausted, the defenders had no choice but to surrender. The battle for Wake Island was over. The Japanese victory had come at a steep cost. They lost 2 destroyers and suffered roughly 1,000 casualties, while the defenders lost only about 100 men. The surviving Americans and civilians were taken prisoner. Most were shipped to Japan and China as prisoners of war, though around 100 workers were kept on the island as forced laborers. Wake remained in Japanese hands for the rest of the war. They fortified the atoll heavily, garrisoning it with more than 4,000 troops and building strong defenses. The U.S. military never attempted to recapture Wake in a direct assault, instead, choosing to bypass it, sever its supply lines, and subject it to periodic bombardments from sea and air. For the garrison, life on Wake became a long, isolated ordeal. It was not until September 4, 1945, 2 days after Japan's formal surrender, aboard USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, that Japanese troops on Wake finally surrendered to American forces. What had begun as a desperate defense by a small and under garrison ended as one of the most remarkable stands in American military history. The defenders of Wake Island, though ultimately overwhelmed, demonstrated extraordinary courage and determination in the face of impossible odds, earning their place in history as symbols of defiance against overwhelming force. **